Hey everyone, thanks for signing in. We're just gonna give people a couple of minutes to fully fill up and attend this webinar session. So if you don't mind, we'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to log in to this Zoom call. Hey everyone, for those of you who've just signed on, we're gonna wait for another 30 seconds to a minute to wait for other people to sign on to the Zoom call. So don't mind us. All right, we're 5 minutes in. I think we should start with the session. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for making time and joining us in today's webinar on conservation tourism. My name is Jessica Lee. I'm from Mandai Nature, and I head our Avian programs and partnerships, and I'm your moderator for today's session. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. If you have any questions at all during the entire webinar session, please use the Q&A box to type in your questions, and where possible, refrain from using the chat box. So we have one place to go to for all Q&As. And finally, to note that we will be recording the session, and this link will be made available later on for viewing. All right. Before we start, I thought it would be great if we warm ourselves up to a little activity. And this activity is to generate word cloud. And the question that I hope to ask you today is what do you think about what conservation tourism is about? And what does it mean to you? This is the Mentimeter with the QR code that you can use to scan in to fill in and populate a word cloud. The link will also be available in the chat for you to connect. And feel free to go all out, right? If you don't know what conservation tourism is, or if it's new to you, you could simply list an activity that you think is associated with conservation tourism. For example, bird watching, or I don't know, kayaking, or eco resorts, and camping, right? So we'll give everyone about a minute or two to populate the word cloud. And once we're done with this, we will have a look at your, the final word cloud later on in this session. All right, so I understand this word cloud is still being populated, and we'll keep it running a little bit in the background, and we'll close it after some time to have a look at the results later on. Before starting this webinar session, we thought it'd be good to also introduce us to all of you out here who we may be very new to you. So we're Mandai Nature. We're a non-for-profit conservation organization based in Singapore, and with a focus on Southeast Asia. We're also the conservation arm of the Mandai Wildlife Group, which operates the wildlife parks in Singapore that may be familiar to you. They include parks like the Singapore Zoo, the Night Safari, and River Wonders. As I mentioned earlier, our region of conservation focus is Southeast Asia. And we have 3 pillars that define our conservation work, which you can see here in this little diagram. And we're really about preserving threatened species in Southeast Asia, protecting the habitat, critical and core habitat, because you can't save animals without saving the spaces they live in, but at the same time, working in tandem together with local communities to see how conservation can also benefit people that live, in these wild spaces with wildlife. And, we support up to 40 or more partners across the region, and many of the partners that we work with have, or do some form of conservation tourism as part of their conservation program. And so we feel that tourism is quite relevant for the conservation of species, of wild spaces, but also, in co-benefiting people. So last year, we commissioned and produced a report, a white paper entitled Promoting the Business of Conservation Tourism in Southeast Asia. And this report is really the inspiration behind this webinar. And we thought this webinar, would be good as a platform for sharing, amongst all the conservation tourism experts that you'll be meeting and talking to later today, but also discussing the role of conservation tourism, right, in the preservation of species and habitats. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our 3 tourism experts. First up is Marjorie. Marjorie is a sustainable tourism specialist whose expertise lies in governance, responsible business development and collaborative management approaches. As one of the co-authors, the slides, yeah, all right, we're good to go. I'll just start again because it's quite disjointed. So Marjorie is our first tourism expert today. She's a sustainable tourism specialist whose expertise lies in governance, responsible business development, and collaborative management approaches. She's also one of the co-authors of the white paper report that we produced last year. Next up is Anne from The Long Run. The Long Run is a membership organization or network of some of the world's most sustainable nature-based travel destinations. Anne is passionate about sustainability and dedicated to support businesses and organizations to embrace responsible practices. She will share a bit more about The Long Run and how they work together to support companies in sustainable tourism. And our third panelist, Willem, is the co-founder and CEO of YAANA Ventures. YAANA Ventures operates 8 sustainable hospitality brands in Asia, including destination management companies, eco-lodges, luxury tent developments, hospitality management, and travel tech providers. All 3 of them are here to share more about their experiences around conservation tourism across the world, but particularly in the context of Southeast Asia. All right, without further ado, I'll hand the session off to our first speaker. Marjorie, over to you.
Sorry, I have to turn my microphone down. Thank you so much for the introductions, Jessica, and hello to everyone. So this study was undertaken to shed some light on the characteristics of designing and operationalizing conservation tourism business, especially to support the growth of conservation tourism in Southeast Asia, which is Mandai Nature's focus region. I co-authored this paper with Dr. Paul Rogers, who led the study, and we reviewed over 40 projects from around the world. We ended up shortlisting 12 good practice examples for more in-depth analysis. Sorry, the slides do go very quickly, I notice. So conservation tourism has been defined as a business approach that makes a significant net positive contribution to conservation. It can be considered a nuanced subcategory of ecotourism. Conservation is really ingrained in the core values of these businesses. And sorry, there it goes again. If we position tourism business approaches that are based on the natural environment along a continuum, nature-based tourism can be found on one end of the spectrum, which includes business approaches that generally have a more piecemeal commitment to conservation goals. Then there is ecotourism. The conservation of natural resources is essential to the management of these businesses. Now, conservation tourism entrepreneurs take this one step further, really directing investment and visitor activities towards verifiable conservation outcomes. Our study identified 9 characteristics of conservation tourism. We selected the best practice, the good practice examples based on demonstrated profitability and the fact that these companies were really able to measure their impact and showcase their impact on conservation. Those were the main reason why we selected those particular cases, and then we analyzed them to filter out what makes these businesses successful. So what is really the key to their success. I'll briefly summarize each of these. So the first one is defining a conservation storyline. Businesses use storylines to connect with their target audience on an emotional level. And at the heart of every conservation tourism business is a compelling conservation storyline, including narratives about the endangered species or a threatened ecosystem that they're trying to conserve, the creation of the protected area, the role of the business in all this, and how it benefits biodiversity, ecosystems, and people. Aiming to achieve conservation through development, which, if you think about it, is often quite a challenge to achieve. Conservation tourism really identifies profitable investments that conserve and enhance natural capital and align with the vision of local people. This way, the business model itself becomes a visitor attraction and a storyline that is innovatively communicated to the broadest possible audience they can reach. Visitor products and excursions are developed around the storyline to create experiences that bring the conservation objectives to life and really try to make the visitors part of the story. So as I already mentioned, the business objective of conservation tourism is to conserve and, where possible, increase target biodiversity and ecosystem health. Conservation issues are considered in every business decision. This is in contrast to other types of nature tourism businesses that may contribute to conservation but have not really embedded clear conservation goals in their business plans with a long-term vision of how their profits and conservation targets will increase over time. Combining conservation and tourism really needs a holistic approach. Several of our interviewees noted that the choice of site is fundamental. Legal and regulatory structures are required to protect and manage natural areas, and while allowing the tourism business development in designated areas. So where these sort of legal structures are weak or poorly defined, conservation tourism entrepreneur may utilize their strengths to try and improve on these legal structures. Now, again, quoting an interviewee, no matter how carefully you build your business, it has an impact. Conservation tourism businesses define and prioritize key opportunities and threats that are to be managed through their business interventions, through their tourism activities. Conservation tourism businesses are continuously monitoring their activity and they're creating feedback loops. So they're continuously trying to see what is our impact and how can we minimize this. The result of which they use to minimize their risk and the potential impacts, but also to demonstrate net positive conservation and community well-being results to which their business has contributed. It's a very time and resource intense effort, as you may imagine, and there are many examples of conservation tourism businesses that have sought collaboration from local people or visitors as a creative and cost-effective way to achieve this continuous monitoring. For many visitors, this is actually a very memorable part of their experience that they learn a lot from, and it really makes them feel part of the conservation story. Conservation tourism typically involves higher costs and risks related to community engagement and conservation activities. Our analysis found that engagement from an experienced investor, was really the key to long-term success of most conservation businesses. So in some cases, smaller scale startups that really managed to establish a viable and reliable product were able to attract experienced investors or business managers with an exceptional dedication to conservation outcomes that were then able to upscale or diversify the business model. That made it grow and that made it successful in the long term. Some successful ventures were able to obtain grant funding or in-kind support. Now, obviously, conservation tourism is designed to have a minimal footprint. This requires careful thinking and planning of the investment in infrastructure and facilities, and also the management of the visitor experiences. Then those are carefully designed following a low impact, high value approach. Conservation tourism may involve investment, but also de-investment. It depends on the former land use. In some instances, rehabilitation projects are required to meet the conservation objectives. Examples of these are removing fences of former cattle farms, restoring ecosystem functions, and addressing invasive species. This will also enhance the visitor experience. Several businesses in our study developed slowly over time, carefully weighing their development decisions and monitoring their impacts along the way. In conservation tourism, community members identified as key conservation actors are embraced as partners. This can include community leaders, but also hunters and other groups of individuals who are a key part of the conservation solution. If people see value in conserving the natural capital that surrounds them, they will become conservation ambassadors. Genuine community participation and entrepreneurship opportunities are fundamental to the ongoing success of conservation tourism. Now, due to their generally remote locations, conservation tourism really demands creativity to establish and grow supply chain linkages that benefit the local economies, while also being cost effective, or at least impact effective for the tourism conservation business. Furthermore, a key challenge may be to find suppliers that are equally dedicated to conservation outcomes and a minimal footprint. A solid interpretation strategy is at the core of any conservation tourism business. It's one place where the smaller stories of the larger conservation storyline are communicated through effective interpretation, oriented towards visitors as well as the host communities. The aim is to raise awareness and enhance understanding, with the ultimate aim to change people's perspectives and attitudes. And in line with this, branding, marketing, and sales are critical success factors for most businesses. We found that this is especially so for conservation tourism businesses because of some of the unique challenges that these enterprises face. For instance, they are often located away from mainstream tourism sites and attractions, which means that they really have to convince visitors that the experience is worthwhile. And remoteness can be a unique selling point, of course, but it can also be a significant challenge. They must initially generate significant word of mouth sales, which is generally achieved by delivering memorable, high quality visitor experiences. In the long term, conservation tourism businesses were found to strongly benefit from a recognized brand and a proactive marketing and sales channels. Now, our study demonstrates that the tourism private sector really can play a crucial role in conserving threatened and endangered biodiversity. We also really found that there's a lot of scope for this in the context of Southeast Asia. And towards the end of our study, we came to a handful of recommendations for businesses to consider when they want to invest in conservation tourism. The first one is really to move beyond the concepts of sustainability and responsible tourism towards a more direct conservation tourism model, where you really place conservation at the forefront. Plan a long-term vision of how you can achieve conservation through financially viable tourism business development. Where relevant, consider partnering with existing conservation projects, because this can result in a mutually beneficial partnership that can achieve measurable conservation outcomes. Treat communities as business partners, bring them along and spend time and effort to make culturally appropriate business decisions. And also allow for this to take a little bit of time to familiarize with one another and really analyze the context. Where relevant, engage with all levels of government to strengthen the enabling environment for conservation. Produce case studies on the measurable net positive conservation benefits. Use media campaigns to raise awareness of the critical role of conservation tourism and the success stories. And finally, use or establish networks to share learning and good practices among conservation tourism businesses and projects. Thank you very much. Back over to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Marjorie. All right, on to the next speaker. Anne, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, everybody, for having the long run at this call. It's really nice to build on what Marjorie was just saying, because I think the long run and the work we've been doing, while it is not coined conservation tourism, manifests a lot of the things that the report was highlighting. So the long run really brings together a very growing and a global community of leaders in sustainability, in tourism, but also in conservation. Because we really want to demonstrate that tourism can be a force for good, and that tourism can help people, it can help nature, and it can help businesses, but that we can all work together to do so. So the long run was created in 2009 with the idea that how can we bring people together that can learn, that can share, that can be inspired to really drive positive change in the ecosystems that they own, that they manage, or that they influence. And, you know, it over time, now we became a program of Preferred by Nature. But for us, this learning, this connecting is still center stage, because there's a lot of things that we can learn from each other. So whatever maybe we can learn from Indonesia can be replicated to somebody in Costa Rica or in Hawaii or in New Zealand or here in Africa. So there's a lot of lessons we can learn from each other. And this is why for us, it is really a community of like-minded businesses. We want to drive change, but we want to drive change by learning from each other and building on each other's lessons learned, both the good, but also the failures, so that we can drive that change, but accelerating through collaboration. So the long run, for us, you can see the long run is a global community. We are thinly spread all around the world, including Asia. And together, the members of the long run now help to conserve about 23 million acres of nature, and they support and impact the lives of about 750,000 people. The long run, when we work with businesses, what we really are helping them trying to do is have a holistic approach to sustainability. How can we integrate and embed sustainability into our operations? We do this by breaking down sustainability into 4 different strands, which we call the 4 Cs: of conservation, of community, of culture, and commons. And together to allow businesses to really look at their business in a 360-degree view, to understand what are my strengths, what are my opportunities, what are some of the challenges that I'm facing, and how can I overcome them? By splitting it into these different areas, each one is really becomes very tangible, and you can really understand what my opportunities are for each one of them, or what my challenges might be, so that over time we can overcome the challenges and leverage the opportunities to drive change. So the framework we've created makes it tangible, but it's also very flexible, because the members of the long run is a diverse community. So it has to be applied to somebody on a marine protected area compared to somebody who's operating in Europe or who is in a desert environment or a rainforest. The key for us is always that impact takes center stage, and that we really want to have a positive impact. The other important thing that we work with members is to really shift their mindset. We are working with the businesses to demonstrate and to make clear to everybody, and we know this already, is that no harm is just no good anymore. We need to have a positive impact in everything that we do. So let's try to understand where is we now, but also where do we want to go? And this is important to then shift businesses' perspective from, what do we want to do today? What do we want to do in a year, 2 year, maybe 3 years, to consider what are our aspirations? What are our long-term vision for the ecosystem that we are part of, for the land that we manage, but also for the communities that we are engaging with. And having that long-term understanding and clearly defining what are our aspirations can really help us decide what projects and activities should we be engaging today, and maybe which ones should we discontinue, because while they're important, they may not help us achieve our long-term goals. So it's both understanding where are we today, but also where do we want to go. In this regard, it's really important to also look at the bigger picture. It's important to look at our own operations, like what are my strengths and opportunities within my 4 walls, within our tourism businesses, within our area, but also to look outside. What can we work with our neighboring landowners? What can we do with the communities we are surrounded by? Because it is really important, as we can't be in an island in the midst of an area that is continuously being degraded. We need to work with others and collaborate and exchange and learn also with the people that we are surrounded by to drive change locally. Because whatever happenings around us, it will also affect our businesses. So making sure that people look inside, but also look outside their 4 walls is really important. And last but not least, what we always say to people, it is a journey. Marjorie highlighted how important it is to put conservation at the center stage of what we do. However, not everybody will be there at that moment in time. It is a journey to integrate sustainability, to put conservation at the heart of our operations and integrate it into what we do. And it's important to be clear that not everybody, we are not perfect. As an individual, I'm not perfect. As an organization, we are not perfect, but we are striving for getting better, becoming more sustainable, having a more positive impact. So as long as we are transparent about it and we are accountable for it, it is important to demonstrate where on the journey are we at, and then to celebrate the different milestones on that journey, because perfect doesn't exist. If we wait until we are perfect to communicate all the amazing things we do, we may never reach it. So what we then do with the people all around the world is we provide them with a lot of support for people individually as well as collectively. So when members join the long run, what we are doing is we are taking them on a guided journey of continuous improvement. People, if they would like to, within 5 years, can reach the level of the Global Ecosphere Retreat Standard, which is really focusing on conservation-based tourism, to verify their commitment, to celebrate their milestone. But it's not needed if they don't want to. What we have created, this 5-step process, is just a way to internalize sustainability and put conservation at the heart of their businesses in a step-by-step way. So it's looking first, where are you at? What are your strengths and weaknesses, as I said, creating that baseline, connecting it with where do we want to go? What are our long-term aspirations? And then through monitoring, reporting, making sure that we can demonstrate our positive impacts. And then creating policies, procedures, and internal systems to really cement that commitment into our operations. The other aspect I said for a continuous journey of improvement is also collaboration. As I said, learning, sharing, inspiring is really what takes center stage. So for us, despite it being a very diverse community scattered all around the world, that diversity is a huge strength, because we have seen how people can learn from each other, even if they're working in a totally different ecosystem, because this inspiration, the problems we face are very often the same, whether it's how do I engage my staff to really help me drive sustainability in my businesses, to how can I inspire the community to become agents of change. These are all things that we will have commonalities all around the world. So we have created a number of things over the years as to how can we connect people so that that continuous exchange can take place, whether it's hosting webinars on different aspects that people have expressed interest in, whether it's creating leadership programs in our communities, breaking down scope 3 and where do I start, to creating an artist in residence program, or how do I create positive impact experiences. So in addition to these virtual engagements, we are also hosting an annual members meeting. And one of our members, we opted to not meet, for example, in London or in Singapore or in New York, but rather at the members that are part of the long run, because we want to give people the opportunity to spend time with people. So for 3 or 4 days, you're surrounded by like-minded people. You can learn and exchange. But in addition, the beautiful thing is you can also see how a destination translates conservation, community, culture, and commerce in their operation, in their landscape, so that you're inspired and have new ideas of what you can take home, adapt and change to your ecosystem, and then drive change further. In addition, we also have a number of regional meetings for the different clusters, whether it's in Asia, Southern Africa, Latin America, or Kenya, where we then combine this inspiration from a global basis with local exchange, whether it's then combining efforts on local sourcing, or whether it is marketing and communications to promote our sustainability efforts. In addition, what we've learned and what Marjorie also shared is we need to celebrate best practice. We need to demonstrate to others and inspire them that change is possible if we put our heart and mind into it. So we often provide case studies to the UN, to GSTC and others about what our members are doing and how are they driving change. What are the best practice examples that others can learn from? We are also hosted the Pure Life Experience, the Sustainability Stage and others, just to really inspire the wider tourism industry. In this regard, we've also actually created 2 free online training sources, one about resource efficiency when it comes to energy and water, which we really wanted to accelerate some of the lessons learned from our members for the wider industry. So whether it's nature-based, conservation-led, or other ways, we need to drive change as an industry. So this provides a really easy, broken down, very simple things people can do to reduce their resource consumption. And the other aspect, the other training so far is the strategic sustainability planning, because we realize that a lot of people really need help with connecting their work today with their long-term aspirations. So that training course is really available to help them achieve that, to just make sure that we can integrate sustainability and make sure we drive that change. And last but not least, our guests. How can we ensure that guests are able to make more informed decisions? And here we helped our members to really communicate and how people stay at their properties will help impact people and help impact the nature they're surrounded by. Just to demonstrate, it's like if people spend $50, where does it go? What stays local? What stays national? What goes international? What is invested in conservation or in communities or in culture? Just to really be able to break down all the amazing work that people are doing and communicating that more effectively. So as I said, we have members thinly spread all around the world, from New Zealand to Hawaii, to Kenya, to Argentina, Costa Rica, or Europe. And I've selected 3 members to really demonstrate a little bit more about the power that tourism can have to drive change when it comes to conservation. The first one is Grootbos Private Nature Reserve in South Africa. It is located about a 2-hour drive from Cape Town, and it's located in the world's one of the hottest of the hotspots in terms of biodiversity, because it's based in the Cape Flora Kingdom. And while they don't have the big five, more than 70% of the plant species that they have within the fine boss can be found nowhere else. So when Michael and his team started Root Boss, you didn't have the big five, but you had an amazing flora kingdom, and they created a tourism enterprise surrounding it that over the years is managing to invest more than $600,000 to $800,000 into conservation, community, and culture. And through their foundation, through accelerating with grants and getting funding from guests and other donors, they raised over $2.7 million for their community work, for their conservation work and culture. So whether that is through sport, to building bridges between the local communities, to enterprise development, to species eradication, invasive species eradication. It's a huge amount of effort that has gone into to really demonstrate and to accelerate the impact that tourism can have on the communities and nature. When it comes to conservation in particular, I just wanted to highlight how the effort of one individual. So Michael Lutzea bought Root Boss in 1991, and it was 121 acres. It eventually grew to 1,029 hectares. And it was bought, and it is bordering the Walker Bay Nature Reserve, which was another 3,000 hectares. But he realized that a lot of the neighboring landowners were not interested in conservation. They didn't really realize the importance of the ecosystem that they're surrounded by and that are situated on their property. But he didn't give up. He then, together with 9 neighboring landowners, actually in 1999, created the Walker Bay Fine Boss Conservancy. And together, they expanded significantly to then 29,000 hectares. This is really important because I think without Michael and his drive, it wouldn't have taken place. And it's now increasingly creating a corridor to the nearby national park so that conservation and the animals can freely move around the area. The community and the conservancy have continuously grown, and today there's about 42 neighboring landowners that are part of the conservancy. And today the success story is that now 8 of them have put their land into servitude, which means that it can only be used for conservation. No other land use in perpetuity can affect this land. So for me, this is a really important example because he was a single person and a dedicated team. But by realizing it can't just be taking place in our 4 walls, in our 121 hectares or 1,000 hectares, he went out to work with others, communicate with others, and drive others to understand the conservation value and the importance that it can have. The next example I wanted to share is about Cayman Ecological Refuge in Brazil. So it's situated in the Pantanal, which is the world's biggest wetland, and in 2000 it was declared the World Biosphere Reserve by UNESCO. However, the area is under threat by soy farms and unsustainable land uses surrounding the Pantanal. Increasingly, the water is drained for agriculture and other practices. So Roberto, his 110,000 hectares acres was really for a long time a little island in the midst of its increasingly degrading landscape. Moreover, he also really felt that there has to be an opportunity to really manage this land sustainable without degrading it. So he went back into the culture of the Pantanal and leveraged the cowboy culture, their traditional knowledge, their traditional practices, to reintroduce cattle into the area so it can coexist with wildlife, but it's also essential for the Pantanal to thrive. So today, Cayman has both cattle ranching, it has tourism, and it has agroforestry, and it is thriving. In addition to that, though, again, Roberto didn't want to be an island in the wider ecosystem. So while his property was, doing very well, a lot of other properties were not. So in 2010, together with the On Safari project, they started to look into the jaguar to see how we can use iconic species to demonstrate to neighboring landowners, 1, please don't kill them because they're just eating your cattle, but instead they can be a huge resource for us. So when in 2012, only about 7% of guests were able to see the jaguar through the rehabilitation program, by 2017, already 90%. And today, pretty much every client is able to see a jaguar at Cayman. meaning that the occupancy of the level of the lodge has significantly increased over the area. And he was able to demonstrate to the other landowners surrounding him that the species worth alive is much more than that, and demonstrating that this is an opportunity and it can be an alternative to traditional cattle ranching or other land uses. In addition, then, through the results of this, again with collaboration, species conservation, he is able to now work with a much wider landscape, and together with neighboring properties, they created a conservation corridor of 229,000 hectares, the 39 times the size of Manhattan, to really provide a functioning ecosystem for the jaguar and to protect a core of the Pantanal. Again, just to demonstrate how tourism can drive change on their property, but how important it is to work with others, whether it's landowners or the community. Last but not least, I just wanted to share an example from Indonesia, which is Niemeijer Island. And here, the story didn't start with conservation. The story started with tourism. When Andrew bought Niemeijer Island and later Champedak Island, it was about tourism first and foremost. There was a no-take zone that surrounded the island, and for Andrew, that is really important. But he realized that while we can support the area of Bintan, which is the second most popular area for travelers to Indonesia after Bali, with 2.5 million travelers in 2019, also tourism poses a huge threat to it. So he created the Island Foundation in 2009 to work with the communities, to really support them and create learning centers, create community support initiative, enterprise development, and so on. But ultimately, he realized that it is important for him to get engaged in the wider conservation area. So in Indonesia, the Indonesian government had gazetted a marine protected areas surrounding Niemeijer Island and Champedak, which spans over 1.2 million acres. It is here as well as on the Far East. It's split in two. However, this was in 2007, but it remained a paper park. So as a result of being gazetted, nothing changed. So the destruction of the marine ecosystem continued. Devastating efforts were going on and nothing was changing. So the ecosystem was degrading and degrading more, tourism contributing also to it with 2.5 million people visiting. So he realized that he, as a tourism business, can have a much wider impact. And he engaged now with Conservation International, with a number of other stakeholders in the area, but Indonesia as a whole, to see how we can now turn this paper park into reality, to make sure that we protect the ecosystem that they are part of, but by making sure that all relevant stakeholders are part of the story. So this is just a few examples of how we as the Long Run have seen in other parts of the world, but also in Indonesia, as to how tourism and conservation can hand in hand. It's important that we realize it is a journey. Nobody is perfect. As long as we strive for having that positive impact, and by collaborating with others, I think we can really drive change and have that positive impact we all want to for our industry.
Thank you, Anne, for that wonderful presentation. And last but certainly not least, with Willem, over to you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you first to Jessica, to Mandai, and the whole team for setting this up. This is a really inspirational webinar, I would say. Also the previous speakers, Marjorie and Anne of the Long Run, really amazing stuff. So I'm coming into this from a little bit of more the commercial side, I'd say, or maybe practical, how to put all of these things or most of these things into practice. So my talk will be in that context. Let me first tell you a little bit about YAANA Ventures, which is our portfolio company. Let me see if I can get these slides going correctly. Yes, so YAANA Ventures was founded in 1993. I will show you this later. So we are a portfolio of companies Jessica already introduced. We are doing everything around tourism, broadly in 3 different categories. We do travel tech, we do travel through our DMC, and we have a number of hospitality projects as well. But in everything that we do throughout the sectors, we are building our companies according to the triple bottom line. So that is with people, planet, in line with profit as well. As I said, we started in 1993. That's this year we are celebrating 30 years. That is with our core company, Kiri Travel, and that was also the foundation for building several other companies. I'll focus a little bit on the eco lodges that started already in 1999 with the building of Tat Phan Resort in the south of Laos. Later on in 2014, we built Anurak, which is in the south of Thailand, and an ecotourism lodge. And I will focus in this presentation mostly on cardamom tented camping Cambodia. We also currently are involved in Visama lodges, which brings conservation tourism to a more luxury level. Okay, so in this presentation, I will focus mostly on cardamom tented camp because it's a great example for conservation tourism. I think what sets cardamom tented camp apart is that it's already a partnership between three like-minded but quite different ventures, if you will. There's Minor Hotel, which is kind of like a Goliath in the hospitality industry. Maybe some of you will know them best from their Anantara chain, but in Africa they also operate YAANA, and they are involved in this particular venture. Very importantly, I will focus on that a little bit more in the next slides. We have a nature conservation NGO involved, Wildlife Alliance. Like I said, we'll talk about that, and we are involved in actually the development of the tented camp and also the marketing and operation of the tented camp. So we all come into this project with our individual strengths, and we leave each other the room where we can produce the most value in what we can bring to the table on a higher purpose. So what you have to do, and it was mentioned before already by both Marjorie and Anne, a successful project, you need to have a clear goal. In particular, if you work together with other partners, you need to basically align your goals. In our case, it was pretty easy. The whole point of cardamom tented camp is to retain lowland rainforest in the cardamom mountains in Western Cambodia, and in order to keep the forest standing, money is needed, and we help to generate that money through our ecotourism project. So our goal basically boils down to your stay, customer stay, helps to keep the forest standing. On a little bit different angle on how you can also see that is shared purpose. And the purpose here, in particular in this particular project, cardamom tented camp, it's part of the Botum Sakor National Park in Western Cambodia, this particular national park has been divvied up into several concessions. Our concession, you can see from the helicopter here, is on the left-hand side, where the forest is still standing, and our neighboring concession basically stripped the whole forest and will use this concession to do monoculture forests, typically oil palm or rubber plantation, this type of thing. Our part of the concession is really to conserve the forest and, of course, and therefore providing the habitat for a thriving wildlife. So how do we do this? Now, YAANA Ventures doesn't have any expertise into how to protect nature. We know how to build eco-lodges, we know how to build them successfully, know how to market them successfully, we know how to run them successfully. We know how to develop this in a way that it minimizes the construction footprint, and also very important in our case, in general, but in particular in our case, because we are building right in the middle of a protected forest, well, forest that we protect ourselves, is to make sure that it leaves no, it does no harm. Also our lodge, and therefore has, we are operating, for example, completely off the grid. We are solar powered, and we have a fantastic water treatment plant on our property as well. So we can focus on that part, on how to build and how to operate and how to market, but we don't know how to protect. And that is where Wildlife Alliance comes in. They are the ones that have rangers, 3 different ranger stations actually, that we help funding. And because of the protection, they deliver on the 18,000 hectares that where this particular protected area consists of. Is also a great place where wildlife that has been rescued from wildlife trade can be released again in relative safety because of the patrols. So yeah, engaging this expertise is really very, very important, crucial for the entire project of Cardamom Tented Camp. See if we can go forward here. Okay, and what we aim there, what our purpose is there, is not only, and it was mentioned before, you can't conserve, you can't help wildlife if you don't give them enough habitat. So what we are doing is we're protecting the habitats of various wildlife, and we see already that wildlife is coming back in great numbers, actually. So these are a number of the photos of the species that are around the lodge and are able to be seen. Most of it can be seen by our visitors as well. Of recently, we even have the good news that wild elephant has been returning to our protected area. So a great success where just by making sure that, you know, the forest keeps standing, and therefore giving the opportunity for wildlife to return and wildlife diversity to return as well. Yeah, this can't be done without rangers, without people on the ground. Sometimes it's overlooked in the bigger picture when you talk about organizations, but it really comes down to the people on the ground. In particular, these are small things that are sometimes lost between the cracks, but these rangers are locals. It's a pretty, for the visitor that come to stay in Cardamom Tented Camp, this is all very interesting, and they pay money to stay in this. But for rangers who do this day in, day out, throughout the year, it can be pretty monotonous. And therefore, getting visitors to have an interest in their daily life and the work they do is of great value. So it's not just contributing in funds, it's also contributing in showing interest and showing up. We find that very, very important. So what does YAANA Ventures do in this all? Well, as mentioned before, everything we do is along the triple bottom line. For the last 30 years, it's a little bit of an outdated term now, but I think it's still very valid. You can't have a sustainable business without making money. and you can't do things for the betterment of the planet, of the community, without having some profit. In our case, we get the with the exception of the lodge manager, everybody comes from the local community. Everybody comes from around. This is very important because it brings the conservation efforts back to the communities that are surrounding the area that we protect. And I mentioned this before with the Cayman project in Latin America, where it's very important to understand for the locals. It's really important to understand like these species, this wildlife really has value, and there's no better ambassador than having your son, daughter, nephew, father, or so work in the conservation project, in this case, Cardamom Tented Camp. So we do a lot of recruiting out of the local community. We do, of course, a lot of training as well, training for our staff, training for our guides, and again, like I mentioned before, making sure that there is cross-training with and cross-communication with the rangers. They're not on our payroll. We support the rangers, but we make sure that our guests do meet the rangers and do see what it is that they do. So with that, we create a local team and make sure that they meet our clients, our guests, and contribute to the story. And it was mentioned before, storytelling is so important. Contribute to the storytelling when our guests come to stay in our lodge. So and this again, I mean, the former speakers brought this up as well. We firmly believe that tourism can be and is a force for good if it deployed in the right way. It can be so done also profitable. In this particular case of Cardamom Tented Camp, all the profit turns over, goes into the project itself, goes into conservation of the area. It can be like that. It doesn't have to be like that, I suppose. But in our case, we do. So yeah, this is a bit of the practical putting the previous speakers' good guidelines in practice in Cambodia. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, William, for your insights into the work you're doing and how, you talk about a partnership coming together, right, with aligned goals and contributing ultimately to conservation of species and habitats while benefiting local people. No, at this point in time, I'd like to maybe to just say thank you to the three of you for your wonderful presentations and your insights into conservation tourism, in the work you do, but also taking this now to the context of Southeast Asia. Before we open the Q&A session, I thought it would be good if we deep dive into the word cloud. If you recall earlier, prior to the start of the webinar, we got all of you to put in your thoughts on what conservation tourism is about. And I did say if it's something new to you, because this is an area you'd like to explore, to just put an activity you think it's associated with conservation tourism. And these are the results. I can see keywords like responsible, sustainability, and education as popping up the biggest. Maybe what I'll do now is open this time up to the three panelists and speakers to maybe for you to comment on what you feel about what the audience are saying about conservation tourism. William, since you were the third speaker, we'll start off with you to provide comments on what the audience here is sensing.
Yeah, this is actually it's a pretty nifty little tool that you've got there of audience participation. Yeah, I from what I see here, clearly this makes a lot of sense. I find it interesting that agroforestry is in there. While agroforestry does have a place, I suppose it is far from biodiversity. So there's a little bit that. sustainability is clearly what people think about what we do here. But very importantly, centrally here is education. And I think this is, we see this as very, very important. This education of our guests in what goes into the conservation of the place where we are. That is in all our eco lodges, by the way, it's the same thing. It's also the education of our staff, and the staff brings everything that they learn in the resort back home into their villages, and they educate their villages and their communities further. So yeah, education is another very important one. Brilliant, thank you.
All right, and in the same reverse order, Anne, do you have anything to say about the outcomes of the word cloud here, on top of Willem?
To be honest, for me, what I really like is that it is not just about conservation or nature, but it's also local communities are here. There's local communities here, there's livelihoods here. And I think that's really important, because I think for me, you know, conservation and conservation tourism, it can't take place in isolation. So we need to make sure that conservation tourism benefits the people, whether it's our staff, whether it's the neighboring communities, whether it's the society at large. And I think that's really important. So we need to work with others in order to make conservation work. And as Willem said, it's like education is a key thing in that. But I think it's important to not forget the people when we also talk about conservation.
Thanks, Anne. And Marjorie, maybe to share your thoughts on the outcome of this word cloud.
Yeah, I think it's a very nice, nice word cloud. It's nice to see that even before our presentations were given, this is sort of a summary of what we've all been talking about. So I think it's a great word cloud result. I picked out a few words that I found very interesting. One was a mindful travel. I think that's really from the perspective of the visitor, that mindfulness that people have when they consciously choose for engaging with such types of tourism products. And I also really like use only what you need. I think that's a very good way of just summarizing the overall approach that conservation tourism businesses try to achieve. They try to balance out that they use what they need and also give back what they can to the greatest extent. So nice, very nice.
Thanks, Marjorie. So I actually had a few questions for you from this word cloud that came to mind as well, that popped to mind. And I noticed someone here, I was surprised to see that the positive impact was really small. It didn't pop up as a big hitter, because I thought, you know, as you guys mentioned in your previous talks, right, that impact is about impacting conservation positively, which is what also kind of defines what conservation tourism is about. And then picking up what you said, Marjorie, on mindful travel, do you think the tourists of today and the future, do you think impact and mindful traveling is something that is big for them or will be big for them in the future? It wasn't for many of us in the past, right? I guess we don't really think about the impact we have when we travel. So maybe to get a sense from the three of you, and I won't pick anyone out, so you may answer freely, but whether you think mindful traveling and positive impact will be something that is more relevant to travelers of today and tomorrow.
Maybe I'll start this time. I think that that if you look at the general trends of people's interests across the world, all different markets, that there is a growing consciousness of the impact we have when we travel, and more people are seeking out places where they can contribute to conservation, where they can contribute to local economies, to social development. I think that that space is really there, that space is really growing because the market is really growing, if that makes sense. I'll let the others come in. Anne?
Yeah. I can add a little bit to that, speaking a little bit from one of our other ventures, Kiri Travel. So that's a DMC. So we see the trends in the travel industry, and already over some time we see that there's a very different approach from travelers into coming into. It might be because of our particular company and the relationships we have with our tour operators worldwide. But what we see is that there's demand for interaction rather than a transaction. So where tourism used to be a transaction, you go to a tourism provider, whatever they do, and you pay them money, and for the money you get something in return. Instead, these days, people want to have an interaction. They want to learn about what a community does or what an activity does, and just be educated. So I think you can put it as under mindful travel. It's not just being entertained, but it is really to get away from a destination more enlightened.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I think it's a general trend, but I think obviously after the pandemic, I think a lot of tourists wants to go and stay much longer in destinations. They want to go much deeper, and I think that whole idea about transformation, I think is definitely a trend that's coming up. I do think in that regard, conservation tourism has a huge potential, because that connection to nature is something that a lot of people are really looking for their transformation. Some of our members, for example, they really focus on creating positive impact experiences rather than just like guest activities. So looking at the experiences they offer and really looking at is like, why are we selecting activities? What is the purpose of them? What do we want to achieve in the transformation for our guests, but also for whoever's taking part in it, to make sure that they are positive for everybody, not just for the guests. But there's also this whole connectedness. I've just came back from Namibia, and the member we work with is really looking into more like a solitude, that we connecting with nature, that we connect with yourself or we connect with your children as something that is definitely needed and that people are increasingly looking for. So trying to see about how can we rethink it, or if we haven't, what are our opportunities, and just making really sure that the experiences that we hope maybe have a transformative or a, mindful, that they really have that intended impact.
Yeah, just to add on what Anne just said, I think there's exactly that. I also see in the word cloud, there's the word opportunity, and this is exactly right. So the opportunity for conservation tourism is right there, because this is what really travelers more and more increasingly demand on their travels. Maybe not the only thing they do, but they definitely want to make it part of their journey. And by the way, completely agree that slow tourism, if you will, is part of that. It's like going to fewer places, but just staying longer and learning more and be more mindful. Yeah.
Thanks for your sharing. Just picking up on what you mentioned, and you mentioned the pandemic, and I guess this is out of my own interest, hearing your conversations, and obviously all of us coming up in the pandemic over the last year. Another pandemic will obviously damage tourism, because it could possibly mean the shutting down of borders and stuff. How do you think, and if so, how do you think conservation tourism businesses could continue to operate, assuming international borders are shut, right? I don't know if any of you would like to take that. It's not an easy question to answer.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So the members of the long run are all more or less do conservation tourism at the different stages of integrating it. But what we found is during the pandemic, not one of them foreclosed, not one of them, because it is conservation at heart, but also those that had multiple land uses or put measures in place to increase their resilience, so that you are not just relying on tourism, but maybe you have additional donor funding, or you have a very strong guest base that want to support your conservation work and your community work. Again, let's not forget the people. in this. And for a lot of people, even if the business shut for a year or 18 months, the conservation work never stopped. The community work of our members never stopped, not once. And it's that power that conservation have, because if we have transformed the guests that came to our properties before the pandemic, they know the value of the work that you provide. So they were happy to support that. And if it's not the guests, then there were other forms that you could engage. And for us, it was really a big thing that we saw, where it's just like nature doesn't stop. We can't stop because we need to provide food to the rangers, support to the rangers, whoever is out there protecting these landscapes and seascapes. So we can't stop our efforts either to protect those.
Willem, you had your mic on, or Marjorie? Yep.
Willem was first. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Of course, the pandemic. I can't bear the thought of another international border closure. So let's hope that doesn't happen ever. Actually, considering the impacts and all that. But yeah, I mean, I agree with what Anne was saying. Like we know. You have to go on, and the conservation needs to go on, and that's the primarily purpose why you're doing it, and that puts the focus differently. If you're doing tourism for the money, it's much easier to say you pull the plug. But if you do it for a higher purpose, in this case conservation tourism, you really cannot. So you become very resilient and inventive, and it's exactly you have your guests. You can go back to your guests, and they know what you're doing. So it's fairly easy to get donations to keep going. But we had another thing which surprised us, particularly in Cambodia, which we thought didn't have a strong, because it's such a new upcoming destination after their 1992 UN elections, that we didn't think there would be a sophisticated domestic market. But we are very wrong. And although we had to drop the price, we got a substantial amount of Cambodian Khmer travelers staying in the lodge and learning about our conservation efforts. And again, here's where education comes in. And it was really interesting and heartwarming, actually, to see the support of local tourists as well, in particular in a country like Cambodia.
Yeah, just adding on to this, I think these are very powerful messages that come from experience, and that's exactly the way I would summarize it as well. I think that conservation tourism businesses are already put in a very challenging position. They already chose for that challenge, where they try to create business in a space where they have to face all these challenges, and they have to make business-wise decisions, and they have to find innovative solutions and communicate in an innovative way. So I think those businesses are by nature already quite resilient. So I think that when you hear Anne talk about the members, that's quite a number of businesses that showcase that they were able to find ways to cope, and each finds their own way. And as Willem highlights with the example of Cambodia, we found in our study that it's happening worldwide, where domestic markets were rapidly increasing their visitation to natural areas, because the pandemic actually made us all want to be spending time outside, where we felt safe, where we could keep distance and still see other people, or find some sort of interaction, and find a place where we could have an experience outside of our homes. And I think that still is with people. There's also a piece that I could maybe share, that I think that whenever there's a crisis somewhere, people are more open to align. they open their minds and see things from different perspectives because they're challenged in that way. And so what you often see is that whenever a crisis pops up, there's more openness to collaboration. And this can also be a very positive result for conservation tourism businesses, where their regular customers may look back at them, or other types of partnerships may form that were not really on the agenda before, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. And I think maybe that's why agroforestry is mentioned here as, that multi-pronged approach, right, to tourism. So rather than focusing only on tourism, you have another, activity, which could be a business activity that helps, generate and keep you afloat, right, during hard times, be it a pandemic or something else. Cool. So I think we have one question from the audience, which I will read out to all of you. And just a reminder to participants, feel free to keep the questions coming in, and please use the Q&A window to type your questions. All right, this is from Hai, and I think Hai is from Vietnam. And his question is, I'm wondering the example of increasing sites of the jaguar in tourism in South America. Is it safe for the tourists to see the predators, so that the tourist site? And is it also good for the animal welfare goals for the animal, so the human and the animal angles? Particularly, the closer the jaguar gets to tourism areas, the more dangerous it is for tourists because of the high increasing encounter rates. And this also may impact the animal by changing its normal behavior and, possibly impact its hunting skills, etc. This is a very, very specific, but also a very specific question. I know, and you have your
Sure.
mic on if you'd like to take it.
Yeah, no, totally. It's my example. So no, I understand your concern. I think the key is habituation is not taming the animal, and it's not domesticating the animal. So it is not as if the animal is, they are going to be encaged or anything. The On Safari project is really a conservation initiative, and it is used to promote ecotourism. Before the On Safari project, the habituation, for the majority of the time, jaguars were hunted in the Pantanal because they eat cattle. So they were not seen as a resource, but rather than just as a nuisance for the community, for the other landowners, because they damaged their property pretty much. So what the On Safari project has able to demonstrate is that if we can habituate them, i.e. tourists sit in a car at a safe distance away from the animal, you can view them. It's like coming to Kenya or coming to Africa, and you sit in a car and you will see the wildlife that you're surrounded by, whether it's the elephants or the lions. You won't engage with them, you won't impact them. But the habituation process is just to make sure that the animals are more used to having those cars and interaction. But there is no impact otherwise on the animals and their behavior. And actually, as a result of the habituation, because people now understand, the landowners understood the value of them, they have stopped hunting them. So the population has significantly increased in the area because now people understand the value that the animal can bring, and that it can be an alternative income source through ecotourism. And that's been really important to protect the Pantanal as an ecosystem, so that it's not just all about agriculture and cattle ranching, but there's alternatives that have less damaging impact.
Thanks, and that's really fascinating, because I just came back from a trip myself from Borneo, specifically the eastern Malaysian state Sabah, where we did a little workshop, on the conservation of hornbills in Sabah. And what you said exactly, encapsulates what they all were saying, and that is, unlike the rest of Borneo, where the hornbill is threatened because it's hunted or killed for the trade, or caught, right, for the trade, in Sabah, the local people actually want the hornbills there because they can then, produce ecotourism products that includes bird watching, and they can most guarantee hornbill sightings. So, and what's stark about that is Sabah is just one state in a, connected island in Borneo, where the different bits of Borneo all had different views and perspectives of the hornbill. One see it as a commodity for the trade, either dead or alive, but one actually values the animal as well, right, because of the income or the livelihoods it could provide. So I think I came back really blown away and fascinated by different perspectives on one island. Willem, you have your mic on. You have something else to add?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I have to add is what is highlighted is you need to actually, for conservation projects, you need fairly large amounts of land. Depending on what you want to do with conservation tourism, obviously you can just replant a bit of forest or bring it back to the former forest, what we do in the south of Thailand. But if you want to pursue wildlife diversity, you need to have enormous amounts of land. Now, the good thing about the long run, if you look at their projects, these are all massive amounts of land that they are, or sea for that matter, that they are helping to protect. That, of course, in itself helps to minimize the effect of a little bit of tourism to view wildlife already there, as the same as in Africa. So there's that. So and that also is a problem, by the way, for Southeast Asia, where you get a diminishing part of nature, of protected areas where wildlife can stay, and that is a problem. Is to find areas large enough that wildlife conservation or nature conservation can really have an effect on wildlife biodiversity.
Thanks, Willem. So we actually have one more question from the audience, and this is actually directed to you, Willem, so you can keep your mic on. And the question is, how does YAANA proactively manage human-wildlife conflict in its conservation tourism projects, if any?
Yeah, that's a nice continuation of what I just mentioned. Because in Southeast Asia, the problem is indeed human-wildlife contact and conflict. It's a real problem. And that has to do with a diminishing amount of protected area where wildlife can safely roam and live and eat. And because of that diminishing area, wildlife goes out, and then you get human wildlife conflict in Thailand. Very much an issue with elephants, wild elephants coming out of national parks to very hungry and foraging. There's these viral videos of elephants coming out of a national park and stopping sugarcane trucks, because they know these iron boxes have sugarcane in it, so to stop them and get some sugarcane out and then let the truck go. These type of things are happening all over. So specifically, what do we do to manage human-wildlife conflict? Well, in the case of cardamom tented camp, that's 18,000 hectares of lowland rainforest. We see an enormous amount of wildlife coming back, but it's fairly small wildlife. So where there is a human conflict, it's really about hunters going into the protected area. So it's really the other way around. It's like hunting. The biggest problem might become elephants. We got elephants back in our area, and because 18,000 hectares for wild elephants is not an awful lot, there might be issues coming up in the future. Well, we have to rely on wildlife lines, and perhaps what an example of I believe Anne brought it up. We may have to get more property.
Or collaborate with others. I think, you know, even the members that we have, not everybody is at large landscape levels. But I think what people really realize is that, as you said, Willem, is like, you know, if you want to provide an ecosystem for key species or biodiversity, we need to collaborate with others. And sometimes our members have 100 hectares or even smaller. But the key is they work with others at the landscape level to see what we can do together, because in isolation, it won't work.
Thank you. Yes.
William, we actually have another question for you. And that is, essentially the question is, what is the general profile of consumer that you play host to? And the second part is there a lot of education you do pre-arrival to prepare visitors for the experience?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So prior to the pandemic, our typical visitor would be from either from Europe or from Western countries. So I would say higher educated, very interested in nature tourism, mindful tourism, this type of thing. Nature bathing was another thing that was on the cloud. This type of visitor. So that's what we aimed for when we opened up. It's also a market we are very familiar with our other travel ventures. And that's what I mentioned, like we were actually quite surprised over the pandemic that there's also a vibrant local market. And we also noticed from Thailand, actually, from our eco lodge there's a lot of interest in conservation, growing interest from the domestic market as well. So since the pandemic, we are adjusting our consumer profile. And it is a good idea to do more education pre-arrival. We don't really do that other than, giving people a list of essentials, what to take and what not to take. But we do quite a bit post visit. So where this whole thing speaks more to people. I think most of our visitors in particular, well, both local visitors and international visitors, it's the first time they stay actually in the middle of a jungle. This is quite unique in Southeast Asia that we are, our lodge is right in the middle of the jungle, and typically national parks don't allow that for good reasons, by the way, but because of the setup for Cambodian national parks, they do allow it in our case. And that's a new thing. So for a lot of visitors, this is their first time, and they get really interested in this type of thing. And we keep on expanding things to do. For example, we are now starting to do stargazing, because we realize that being in the middle of the jungle, we have no light pollution. So there's another thing that we can add to our portfolio of things to do. But yeah, we could potentially do more on education pre-arrival as well.
Oh.
Good suggestion.
All right. So we're coming to the end of this webinar session. So maybe a final question for all three of you. And please keep your answers succinct because we're actually at the time limit. And the question is, how would you suggest businesses even get started in the first place? And how do they go about balancing the pros and cons of their conservation tourism business? Perhaps Marjorie, if you could start us off with that question, the answers to the question, that would be awesome.
I actually think the others will speak much more from their own experience. So I think they have a better response to this question, how to start off. I think that having a good thought about how you want to set this up and coming up with a good plan of how you are trying to find this balance between the conservation objectives and the tourism development objectives, and finding this way where you can contribute to conservation by having development. I think that is really where it starts. And what I think most of the examples that we looked at in our study, I think they really learned a lot along the way. And like Anne said, there's no perfect way right away. So you have to learn from trial and error, and monitoring remains a very important aspect then to continue to do that along the way.
Anne, do you have anything to add to what Marjorie has said?
We always just say, just start somewhere. I think it's like, you know, we're often just so, we think we need to have it all figured out, or we need to have it all ready, and then you start. But sometimes it's just like, just do one step, like just make one decision, and that can go in the right direction. But I think, you know, Marjorie is obviously right. We need to know ultimately, with every project we want to have, what is it that we want to achieve? And having that in mind, I feel personally, is so important, because we get bogged down so much into our day-to-day operations and making the business work or the conservation work, that sometimes we forget, what is the bigger picture? What do we want to achieve? What do we aspire for nature, people, culture, and our business? Because I think if you keep that in mind, you can really select priority areas. Because I think when you start, there seems like an untouchable things I have to do. You can't do it all at once. You have to put priorities in and be like, okay, these are the 3 things I can focus on in 2023. But in order to prioritize, you need to have a plan. You need to know if this is the right thing to invest in, or where you put your human or financial resources in.
Thanks, Anne. And Willem, any final thoughts?
Well, I think there's a lot of resources out there. The long run itself is a treasure trove of resources. There's GSTC. There's a lot of things out there. Marjorie's own work and Mandai, your own work there. Reading into that will give a lot of inspiration. I do agree. It's as an entrepreneur, just start, go for it. And last but not least, I would say partnership. It's what we use in Cardamom Tended Camp as well. We fully are aware that we are not wildlife conservation experts. We leave that to Wildlife Alliance, and we can set up develop camp and things like that, and run hospitality. And over time, you learn from each other. We've learned that as well. Is that in particular. Conservation NGOs are typically not very charmed by tourism, because tourism overall doesn't have a great name. But over time, you learn what each of you can contribute, and you learn from each other. And yeah, I think coordination with specialists is another way you can kickstart projects.
Cool. Thank you for that, for all your insights. So for people here in the audience who are running conservation tourism in some form, keep going. You're on the right track. It's a learning journey, as we heard from all our panelists today. And for those of you here who are thinking of embarking on conservation tourism, you know, two simple words for as the answer: just start. So I hope if there's anything you take away from this, it's these 2 keywords. And with that, we've come to the end of our webinar session. I'd like to take this time to thank our 3 panelists for making time, and wherever they are in the world, to stay and share all their insights and their key learnings with us. I do understand there's some questions in the Q&A that haven't been answered yet. You would see here on the slide there's an email address. Feel free to take a photo or screen capture of this slide, and you can email your inquiries to this email address, and we will forward your questions to the relevant panelists for today and get an answer for you. I'm sorry we're not able to take all the questions today because we've sort of run out of time. And finally, thanks to all the participants who stayed on and joined us this session. All right, with that, I will close this webinar session. And I'd like to also add that once this closed, you would see a post-webinar survey. So please take your time to fill it out, because it also help us make future webinars more successful. This is our very first webinar that we've run as Mandai Nature, and we do hope to run more. So your feedback will be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Thanks, Willem. Thanks, Marjorie and Anne. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone.